Come on in. Don't be shy. Lottie? Look at that, huh? Now, this Rose Viola is 20 years old, is 5 feet 5 inches tall in her high heels, weighs 120 pounds net, has a 26-inch waist and a 36-inch bust, and wears a 4 1/2 shoe. Moreover, let's see, she has a 7-inch ankle and an 11-inch calf. And the reason I know all these intimate details is because a friend of mine by the name of Rube Goldstein has Rose Viola in a burlesque show and advertises her as the American Venus. And he's always prints these specifications in his ads. But of course, Rube Goldstein has no way of putting down in figures how beautiful Rose Viola is, because after all, any pancake may have the same specifications and still be a rutabaga. All Rube can do is show photographs of Rose Viola, and after you see these photographs, and then you see Rose Viola herself, you have half a mind to look the photographer up and ask him what he means by so grossly underestimating the situation. She has big blue eyes, and hair the color of sunup, and furthermore, this color is as natural as a 6 and a 5. Her skin is as white and smooth as ivory, and her teeth are like rows of new corn on the cob, and she has a smile that starts slow and easy on her lips and in her eyes and seems to sort of flow over the rest of her face until all male characters observing same are wishing there is a murder handy they can commit for her. Well, I suppose by this time you're saying to yourself, what is such a darbaroo doing in a burlesque turkey? For burlesque is by no means an intellectual form of entertainment. And the answer to this question is that Rube Goldstein pays Rose Viola $400 per week, and this is by no means tin. Kids. And the reason Rube Goldstein pays her such a sum is not because Rube is any philanthropist, but because Rose Viola draws like a flaxseed poultice. For besides her looks, she has that certain something that goes out across the footlights and hits every male character present smack dab in the kisser and makes him hate to go home and gaze upon his ever-loving wife. In fact, I hear that for 3 weeks after Rose Viola plays a town, the percentage of missing husbands appalls the authorities. Yeah, this is car number 4. We're stuck between 50 and 51.
So what do you want me to do?
Can you get us out?
Sure, leave it to me.
Thanks. Well, might as well make yourself comfortable. So he hires her at 25 slugs per week to start with, and raises her to half a C, and makes her the principal the second night, when he finds 18 blokes lined up at the stage door after the show, looking to date her up. In 3 weeks, she is his star, and he is 3-sheeting her as if she is Catherine Cornell. She comes out on the stage all dressed up in a beautiful evening gown and sings a little song. As soon as she begins singing, you wonder, unless you see her before, what she really is, as you can see by her voice, that she is scarcely a singer by trade. Her voice is not at all the same as Lily Pond's, and in fact, it is more like an old-fashioned coffee grinder. And about the time you commence to figure that she must be something like a magician and will soon start pulling rabbits out of a hat, Rose Viola begins to dance. It is not a regular dance, to be sure. It is more of a hop and a skip and a jump back and forth across the stage. And as she is hopping and skipping and jumping, Rose Viola is also feeling around for zippers here and there about her person, and finally evening gown disappears, and she seems to be slightly dishabille, but in a genteel manner. And then you can see by her shape that she's indeed a great artist. Sometimes she'll come down off the stage and work the center aisle, and this is when the audience really enjoys her most. She'll always stop before some bald-headed old character in the front seat, where bald-headed characters are generally found, and will pretend to make a great fuss over him, singing to him, and maybe kissing him on top of the bald head and leaving the print of her lips and the rouge on there. We sometimes put bald-headed characters to a lot of bother explaining when they get home. Well, it seems the character, by the name of Nussbaum, who runs a spot called the Pigeon Club, hears of Rose Viola, and he goes to see her one night at the Old Myth Theater on Broadway, where Rube Shaw is playing a New York engagement. And this newsbum is such a character, is always looking for novelties for his club. And he decides that Rose Viola will go good there. So he offers her a chance to double at his club, working there after she gets through with her regular show, and Rube Goldstein advises her to take it. As Rube is very fond of Rose, he says this may be a first step upward in her career, because the Pigeon Club is patronized only by very high-class rum pots. So Rose Viola opens one night at the Pigeon Club, and she's working on the dance floor close to the tables and doing the same act she does in burlesque, when a large young character who's sitting at one of the front tables with a bunch of other young characters, including several nice-looking Judies, reaches out and touches Rose Viola with the end of a cigarette, a spot she just unzippers. Now, of course, this is all in the spirit of fun, but there's something that never happens at a burlesque house. And naturally, Rose is startled no little, and quite some. In addition to this, she is greatly pained. And it seems that it is the lighted end of the cigarette that the large young character touches her with. So she begins letting out screams, and these screams attract the attention of Rube Goldstein, who is present to see how she gets along at her opening. And although Rube is nearly 70 years old and is fat and slow and sleepy looking, he steps forward and flattens the large young character with a dish of chicken a la king, which he picks up off a nearby table. Well, it seems that the large young character is nobody but a character by the name of Mr. Choicer, who has great sums of money and a fine social position. And this incident creates some little confusion, especially as old Rube Goldstein also flattens Newsbomb with another plate, this one containing lobster Newburg, when Newsbomb comes along complaining about Rube ruining his chinaware and also one of his best-paying customers. Then Rube puts his arm around Rose Viola and makes her get dressed and leads her out of the Pigeon Club and up to Minnie's restaurant on Broadway, where I am personally present to observe much of what follows. They sit down at my table and order up a couple of oyster stews, and Rose Viola is still crying at intervals, especially when she happens to rub the spot where the lighted cigarette hits. And Rube Goldstein is saying that for 2 cents, he'll go back to the Pigeon Club and flatten somebody again. When all of a sudden the door opens, and in comes a young character in dinner clothes. He is without a hat, and he's looking rumpled up no little, and on observing him, Rose Viola lets out a small cry, and Rube Goldstein picks up his bowl of oyster stew and starts getting to his feet, for it seems that they both recognize the young character as one of the characters at Mr. Choicer's table at the Pigeon Club. This young character rushes up in great excitement and grabs Rube's arm before Rube can let fly with the oyster stew, and he holds Rube down in his chair, and he looks at Rose Viola and speaks to her as follows. "Oh," he says, "I search everywhere for you after you leave the Pigeon Club. I wish to beg your pardon for what happens there. I am ashamed of my friend Mr. Choicer. I will never speak to him again as long as I live. He is a scoundrel. Furthermore, he's in bad shape from the chicken a la king. Oh," the young character says, "please forgive me for ever knowing him." Well, all the time he is talking, he's holding Rube Goldstein down and looking at Rose Viola. And she's looking back at him, and in 5 minutes more, they do not know Rube Goldstein and me are in the restaurant. And in fact, they're off by themselves at another table, so the young character can make his apologies clearer. And Rube Goldstein is saying to me that after nearly 70 years, he comes to the conclusion that the Judies never change. Good. About time. So then, this is the beginning of a wonderful romance. And in fact, it is love at first sight on both sides, and very pleasant to behold at that. It seems that the name of the young character is Daniel Frame, and he is 26 years of age, and his last year of law school at Yale. I also learned that this Daniel Frame is an only child, and lives with his widowed mother in a 2-story white colonial house with ivy on the walls and a yard around it, just outside the city of Manchester, New Hampshire.
Thank you, my good man. There now, Henry.
I learned that his mother has an old poodle dog by the name of Rags and 3 servants, and that she lives very quietly and never goes anywhere much except maybe to church, and that the moonlight is something wonderful up around Manchester, New Hampshire. Furthermore, I learned that Daniel Frame comes from the best people in New England, and that he likes skiing and Benny Goodman's band, and hates mufflers around his neck, and is very fond of popovers for breakfast, and that his eyes are dark brown, and that he is 6 feet even and weighs 180 pounds, that he never goes to a dentist in his life. also learn that the ring he wears on his little finger of his left hand is his family crest, and that he sings baritone with a glee club, and the chances are I will learn plenty more about Daniel Frame if I care to listen any further to Rose Viola. He wishes to marry me, Rose says. He wishes to take me to the white colonial house outside of Manchester, New Hampshire, where we can raise Sealyham terriers and maybe children. I love Sealyham terriers, she says. They are awfully cute. Daniel wishes me to quit burlesque entirely. He sees me work at the Mid the other night, and he thinks I'm wonderful, but, Rose says, he says it worries him constantly to think of me out there on that stage, running the risk of catching colds. Another thing, Rose Viola says, Daniel wishes me to meet his mother, but he's afraid she'll be greatly horrified if she finds out the way I'm exposed to the danger of catching colds. He says, Rose says, that his mother is very strict about such things. When I ask Rube Goldstein what he thinks about it, Rube says to me like this. Well, he says, I think it will be a fine thing for her to marry this young character. Although, Rube says, from what he tells her of his mother, I do not see how they're going to get past her. Why, I say, Rose Viola is a fine artist and does not need such a thing as marriage. Yes, Rube says, she is the finest artist in the line I ever see, but one. Laura Lagallo is still tops with me. She retires on me way back yonder before you ever see any of my shows. But, he says, if Rose marries this young character, she will have a home and a future. Rose needs a future. This burlesque business is about done around here for a while, Rube says. I can see the signs. The blats are beefing, and the cops are complaining about this and that, and one thing and another. They have no soul for art. It is always this way with burlesque, Rube says. It is up and down. It is on the way down now. And Rose may not still be young enough by the time it goes up again. Yes, he says, Rose needs a future.
Come on.
Well, a couple of nights later, Rube gets an order from the police commissioner that there must be no more of this and that and one thing and another in his show. And what is more, the police commissioner puts cops in all the burlesque houses to see that his order is obeyed. So there is Rose Viola out on the stage of the Mid doing a number in full costume without ever reaching for as much as a single zipper. And I can see what Rube Goldstein means when he says Rose needs a future. Because looking at Rose in full costume really becomes quite monotonous after a while. To tell the truth, the only one who seems to appreciate Rose in full costume is Daniel Frame, when he comes down from Yale one weekend and finds her in this condition. In fact, Daniel Frame is really quite delighted with her. It is wonderful, he says. It is especially wonderful because I tell my mother all about you, and she's talking of coming down from Manchester, New Hampshire to see you perform, and I've been worrying myself sick over her beholding you out there in danger of catching colds. I know she'll be greatly pleased with you now because, he says, you look so sweet and modest and so well dressed. Now, it comes on another Saturday night, and I am backstage at the Mid talking to Rube Goldstein, and he's telling me that he's greatly surprised to find business holding up so good. The house is packed to the doors, and I tell Rube that maybe he's wrong all these years, that the public appreciates art, even when it has its clothes on. But Rube says he thinks not. He says he thinks that it is more likely that the customers are just naturally optimists. Rose Viola is on the stage now in full costume singing her song when all of a sudden somebody in the back of the audience lets out a yell of fire. And this is an alarming cry in any theater, to be sure, especially in a spot like the Mid, as it is an old house and about as well fixed to stand off a fire as a barrel of grease. Then a duty fireman by the name of Rosofsky, who was always on duty in the Mid when the show is on, comes rushing backstage and says it is a fire, all right. It seems that a cafeteria next door to the Mid is blazing inside, and the flames are easing their way through the theater wall, the front of the house by the main entrance. And in fact, when the alarm is raised, the whole wall is blazing on both sides. And it is a most disturbing situation, to be sure. Well, the audience in the Mid is composed mostly of male characters, because male characters always appreciate burlesque much more than females or children. And these male characters now rise from their seats and start looking for the exits nearest to them. But by now, they are shut off from the main entrance by the fire, so they commence looking for other exits, and there are several of these. But it seems from what Wasowski says afterward that these exits are not used for so long that nobody figures it will ever be necessary to use them again, and the doors do not come open so easily, especially with so many people trying to open them at once. Then the male characters begin fighting with each other for the privilege of opening the doors and also getting out through the doors after they are opened, and this results in some confusion. In fact, it is not long before the male characters are fighting all over the premises and knocking each other down and stepping on each other's faces in the most discourteous manner. Now, a few of the male characters are smart enough to leap up on the stage and hightail it out of them by the back way, but most of them are so busy fighting on the floor of the theater that they do not think of this means as an exit. And it's just as well they do not think of it all at once at that. As there's but one narrow stage door, and the rush will soon pile them up like jackrabbits there. The orchestra quits playing, and the musicians are dropping their instruments and getting ready to duck under the stage. And Rose Viola is standing still in the center of the stage with her mouth open, looking this way and that in some astonishment and alarm, when all of a sudden, a tall, stern-looking old Judy with white hair and dressed in gray stands up on a seat in the front row right back of the orchestra leader and says to Rose Viola like this. "Quick," she says, "go into your routine. Look, boys," she hollers. And there on the stage is Rose Viola doing her hop, skip, and a jump back and forth, and feeling for the zippers here and there about her person and finding same. Now, on hearing the old Judy's voice, and in observing the scene on the stage, the customers gradually stop fighting with each other and begin easing themselves back into the seats and paying strict attention to Rose Viola's performance. And all the time, the wall behind them is blazing, and it is hotter than 106 in the shade, and smoke is pouring into the Mid. Anybody will tell you that Rose Viola's feat of holding an audience against the house fire is really quite unsurpassed in theatrical history. The tall, stern-looking old Judy remains standing on the seat in the front row until there are cries behind her to sit down because it seems she's obstructing the view of some of those back of her. So finally she takes her seat and Rose Viola keeps right on working. By this time, the fire department arrives and has the situation in the cafeteria under control, and the fire in the wall extinguished, and the fire captain and a squad of men come into the Mid because it seems that there are rumors abroad that a great catastrophe takes place in the theater. In fact, the captain and his men are greatly alarmed because they can't see a thing inside the Mid when they first enter on account of the smoke, and the captain sings out as follows, "Is everybody dead in here?" Then he sees through the smoke what is going on there on the stage, and he stops and begins enjoying the scene himself, and his men join him. And a good time is being had by one and all, until all of a sudden Rose Viola keels over in a faint from her exertions. Rube orders the curtain down, but the audience, including the firemen, remain for some time afterward in the theater, hoping that they may get an encore. While I'm standing near the stage door in readiness to take it on the Jesse Owens out of there, and in case the fire gets close, who comes running up all out of breath but Daniel Frame. "I just get off the train from New Haven," he says. "I run all the way from the station on hearing a report that the Mid is on fire. Has anybody heard?" he says. Is Rose safe?" Well, I suggest that the best way to find out about this is to go inside and see. So we enter together, and there among the scenery, we find Rube Goldstein and a bunch of actors still in their makeups gathered about Rose Viola, who was just getting to her feet and looking somewhat nonplussed. At the same moment, Halligan, the cop stationed in the Mid, comes backstage, and pushes his way through the bunch around Rose Viola and taps her on the shoulder and says to her, "You are under arrest," Halligan says. "I guess I'll have to take you too, Mr. Goldstein," he says. "My goodness," Daniel Frame says. "What is Miss Viola under arrest for?" "For putting on that number out there just now," Halligan says. "It is a violation of the police commissioner's order." "Heavens and earth," Daniel Frame says. "Rose, do not tell me you are out there tonight, running the risk of catching cold as before." "Yes," Rose says. "Oh my goodness," Daniel Frame says. "And all the time my mother is sitting out there in the audience. I figure this week is a great time for her to see you perform, Rose," he says. "I cannot get down from New Haven in time to go with her, but I send her alone to see you, and I'm to meet her after the theater with you and introduce you to her. What will she think?" "Well," Halligan says, "I have plenty of evidence against this party. In fact, I see her myself." "Not bad," he says. "Not bad." Rose Viola is standing there looking at Daniel Frame in a sad way. And Daniel Frame is looking at Rose Viola in even a sadder way. When Rosofsky, the fireman, shoves his way into the gathering and says to Halligan, "Copper," he says, "I overhear your remarks. Kindly take a walk," he says. "If it is not for this party putting on that number out there, the chances are there will be 100 dead in the aisles from the panic. In fact," he says, "I remember seeing you yourself knock over 6 guys trying to reach an exit before she starts dancing." "She's a heroine," he says, "and that's what she is, and I'll testify to it in court." Well, at this point, who steps in through the stage door but the tall, stern-looking old Judy in gray? And when he sees her, Daniel Frame runs up to her and says, "Oh, Mother," he says, "I'm so mortified. Still," he says, "I love her just the same." But the old Judy scarcely notices him, because by this time, Rube Goldstein is shaking both of their hands, and then over Rube's shoulder she sees Rose Viola. And she says to Rose like this, "Well, miss," she says, "that is a right neat strip you do out there just now. Although," she says, "you are mighty slow getting into it. You need polishing in spots, and then you'll be okay. Rube," she says. "Speaking of neat strips, who is the best you ever see?" "Well," Rube Goldstein says, "if you're talking of the matter as art, I will say that 30 years ago, if they happen to be holding any competitions anywhere, I would be betting on you against the world, Laura." Looks nice.
Saver.